On January 17, 1934, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary received its first prisoners under a new promise: absolute isolation, absolute control. Men were locked alone in concrete cells measuring 5 feet by 9 feet, surrounded by freezing water and silence so complete it broke the mind. Over the next 29 years, 36 men died here from murder, execution, and despair. The prison closed in 1963. The cells were emptied, the doors were sealed, but something remained. Park rangers now report voices calling their names from Cellblock D after midnight. Tourists hear sobbing from solitary cells that no one is allowed to enter. And long after the last prisoner left the island, the sound of a banjo still echoes through the corridor where Al Capone once claimed his murdered victim never stopped playing. This is not a story about criminals who could not escape. It is about something that never left. Alcatraz Island sits 1.25 miles off the coast of San Francisco, surrounded by currents that move at 8.7 miles per hour, cold enough to kill in 20 minutes, fast enough to drag a body out to sea before anyone could mount a rescue. The island itself is only 22 acres of windswept rock, barren, inhospitable, a natural prison long before men built walls. The United States Army claimed the island in 1853. They built a fortress, then a military prison. For 80 years, soldiers were court-martialed and locked in stone cells beneath the parade ground. But these were military men, disciplined, expected to endure. What came after was something else entirely. In 1934, the Department of Justice transformed Alcatraz into something unprecedented in American corrections. They called it a maximum security federal penitentiary. That was bureaucratic language. What they actually built was a machine designed to dismantle human identity through systematic isolation. The philosophy was simple: remove every privilege, every comfort, every human connection. Warden James Johnston arrived with explicit instructions. Alcatraz would house the most incorrigible criminals in the federal system, men who had proven impossible to control in other institutions, men who would receive one privilege only: food, shelter, medical care. Everything else, including conversation, had to be earned. The rule of silence was absolute. Prisoners could not speak to each other during meals, during work, during recreation. Guards enforced this with clubs and solitary confinement. A man could spend years on Alcatraz and never have a meaningful conversation with another human being. The psychological impact was immediate and catastrophic, but isolation was only the beginning. Cellblock D was different. Even among guards, it carried a particular dread. Located on the lower tier of the main cell house, it contained 42 cells. 14 of these were known as the Hole, solitary, confinement cells with solid steel doors, no windows, no light, no ventilation beyond a single grate in the floor. When that door closed, a man was sealed in absolute darkness and near absolute silence. 5 feet wide, 9 feet deep, a concrete bed, a hole in the floor for waste. Nothing else. Federal regulations stated that prisoners could be held in the hole for a maximum of 19 days. In practice, men spent weeks, sometimes months. Guards would slide food through a slot twice a day. Otherwise, there was no human contact, no voice, no light. Time ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. The psychiatric effects were predictable and documented. Dr. Romney Ritchie, the prison's first physician, kept meticulous records. Within 48 hours of isolation, prisoners exhibited acute anxiety. Within a week, auditory hallucinations. After 2 weeks, complete dissociation from reality. Men would scream at walls, claw at doors until their fingers bled. Some stopped speaking entirely and never recovered the ability. Dr. Ritchie's report, dated June 9, 1935, describes a prisoner removed from the hole after 23 days. The man could not recognize his own name, could not recall why he was in prison. When asked simple questions, he would stare at the wall and whisper numbers in sequence, 1 through 10, over and over. He continued this behavior until his death 7 months later. The report concludes with a single underlined sentence: "Prolonged isolation does not correct behavior. It erases the capacity for behavior entirely." But Warden Johnston did not discontinue the practice. If anything, the use of the hole increased. Between 1934 and 1948, over 300 documented cases of extended solitary confinement occurred in Cellblock D. At least 18 of those prisoners died within a year of release from isolation. Suicide, psychotic breaks. One man walked into the bay and drowned himself during yard time 3 days after emerging from the hole. He left a note in his cell. It contained one sentence, repeated 47 times. "It is still in there with me." Guards began to notice something else. Maintenance logs from 1937 record unexplained temperature drops in Cellblock D. Specific cells would become measurably colder than surrounding areas, cells 12, 13, and 14 in particular. Thermometer readings showed differences of 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit compared to adjacent cells. Engineers inspected the ventilation system. No mechanical explanation was found. Officer Clyde Fulton worked the night shift in Cellblock D from 1938 to 1942. His incident reports describe a recurring phenomenon. After lights out at 9:30, when the block should have been silent, he would hear whispering, multiple voices, low and indistinct. He would walk the tier, flashlight ready, expecting to find prisoners communicating in violation of silence rules. Every cell was empty. Every prisoner accounted for in other blocks. The whispering would stop the moment he approached, but when he returned to his desk at the end of the tier, it would begin again. Fulton filed 7 separate reports requesting investigation. His supervisor noted that he showed no signs of mental instability and had an exemplary record. The reports were filed. No investigation occurred. On December 4, 1939, prisoner Rufus McCain was placed in solitary cell 14 for assaulting another inmate. He would remain there for 8 days. On the second night, McCain began screaming at 2:15 in the morning. Not words, just sustained, animalistic screaming that echoed through the entire cell block. Officer Fulton rushed to the door and ordered McCain to be silent. McCain kept screaming. Fulton opened the food slot to assess the situation. McCain was pressed against the far wall, staring at something Fulton could not see. When Fulton demanded an explanation, McCain turned to him and said very clearly, "It has orange eyes. It has orange eyes, and it will not stop looking at me." McCain was removed from the cell the next morning. He was examined by Dr. Ritchie, who found no evidence of hallucination or psychotic episode. McCain was coherent, calm. He described the entity in precise detail, roughly human in shape, radiating cold, eyes that glowed orange like coals. He insisted it had stood in the corner of the cell for 6 hours without moving, just watching. McCain refused to return to cell 14. He was placed in cell 13 instead. 3 days later, on December 7th, McCain was found dead in his bunk. Cause of death was listed as heart failure. He was 34 years old with no prior history of cardiac issues. Dr. Ritchie performed the autopsy himself. His notes indicate McCain's heart showed no disease, no blockage, no structural abnormality. The organ had simply stopped. In his final report, Ritchie wrote, "I cannot determine a physiological cause of death. The prisoner's heart ceased to beat without medical explanation. His face showed an expression of extreme terror that remained fixed through rigor mortis." Cell 14 was taken out of use for 2 weeks. When it was reopened, the cold spot remained. Thermometer readings showed 52 degrees Fahrenheit when surrounding cells measured 68. No mechanical explanation was ever found. This was the moment Alcatraz crossed a threshold. Punishment had become something else, something that did not end when the cell door opened, something that learned to wait in darkness. The phenomena did not stop. They multiplied. Between 1940 and 1950, Cellblock D became the epicenter of a pattern that would repeat across decades with eerie consistency. Different guards, different prisoners, same locations, same experiences. Officer Robert Baker worked the main cell house from 1941 to 1947. His daily log entries are preserved in the National Archives. On March 3, 1943, he recorded, "Heard sobbing from D Block Tier 2 at approximately 11:45 p.m. All cells confirmed empty during count. Sound persisted for 7 minutes, then ceased abruptly." On April 17, 1943, another entry. "Sobbing heard again from D Block. Duration 4 minutes. Source could not be located." On September 22, 1943. "Sobbing in D Block. Same location. Checked cells 14, 13, 12. All empty. Sound stopped when I reached cell 12." Baker was not alone. Between 1940 and 1952, 17 different guards filed similar reports. The sobbing always came from the same section of Cellblock D, always between 11:30 p.m. and midnight, always from cells that were documented as empty. The incidents were too consistent to be explained by individual hallucination, too specific to be coincidence. The prison administration faced an uncomfortable reality. Multiple trained, credible officers were documenting identical phenomena across years. Either they were all lying in coordinated fashion, or something was occurring that had no rational explanation. The official response was silence. Reports were acknowledged and filed. No investigation was launched. Guards learned not to mention the incidents in front of administrators, but among themselves, they maintained an informal warning system. Night shift in D Block was the assignment no one wanted, especially the cells at the end of the tier. Then there was the banjo. Alphonse Capone arrived at Alcatraz in August of 1934, public enemy number 1, the most famous gangster in America, the man who controlled Chicago through violence and corruption. Alcatraz was designed to break men like Capone, strip away the power, the influence, the identity. Capone was assigned to cell B-206 on the second tier of the main cell house. He was allowed one privilege: music. He played the banjo during recreation time in the shower room. Other inmates remember the sound echoing through the corridors: jazz standards, folk songs, anything to fill the silence. But Capone began to deteriorate rapidly. Tertiary syphilis was destroying his brain. By 1938, he exhibited severe neurological symptoms: confusion, paranoia, hallucinations. He would sit in his cell and play the banjo at the walls, sometimes for hours. Guards reported that he seemed to be playing for someone they could not see. Officer William Hart recorded an incident on January 11, 1939. He observed Capone in his cell at 8 p.m., playing the banjo and speaking to the corner of the room. Hart could not hear the conversation clearly, but noted that Capone appeared distressed. When Hart approached, Capone turned and said, "He will not leave me alone. He says I owe him. He says I owe him, and he will wait as long as it takes." Capone refused to identify who he was referring to. When pressed, he became agitated and claimed, "The man I killed, the one I shot, he is here. He is always here." Capone was transferred to the prison hospital in November of 1939 and released on medical grounds in January of 1939. Wait. No. He was transferred in November of 1939 and released in January of 1940. He died in 1947, but the banjo music did not stop. Guards working the night shift in Cellblock B began reporting the sound of banjo strings in the corridor near cell B206. Not a melody, just random plucking, metallic notes that echoed in the silence after lights out. Officer Kenneth White filed the first report on March 4th, 1941. Heard banjo music from vicinity of cell B206 at approximately 10:15 p.m. Cell is currently unoccupied. Investigated and found no source. Sound ceased upon approach. The reports continued through the 1940s and into the 1950s. Always the same location. Always after hours when the cell block was locked down. The sound was distinctive enough that multiple officers could identify it as a banjo specifically, not a radio, not metal stress. A banjo being played by someone who knew the instrument. In 1953, maintenance worker Joseph Gomez was repairing plumbing near cell B206 at 11 p.m. He heard the banjo clearly, 4 or 5 notes, then silence. He walked to the cell and examined it closely. It was empty, stripped of furniture. The acoustics made it impossible for sound to carry from other cells. Gomez filed a report stating, "I heard it. I do not know what it was, but I heard it." The pattern was undeniable. Al Capone had been gone for over a decade. Different guards, different years, same phenomenon. The prison could dismiss one report. It could not dismiss 37 reports across 14 years, all describing identical sounds in the same location. But Cellblock D remained the most active location, and the incidents there were not limited to sounds. In 1946, Alcatraz experienced the most violent escape attempt in its history. 6 prisoners overpowered guards and seized weapons from the armory. The Battle of Alcatraz lasted 2 days. 3 prisoners were killed. 2 guards were murdered. One guard, Harold Stites, was shot in the face at point-blank range in Cellblock D. He died instantly in the corridor between cells 10 and 12. Officer Stites' blood soaked into the concrete floor. It was cleaned, mopped, scrubbed with industrial chemicals. But according to maintenance logs, a stain remained, a dark discoloration that would not fade. Over the following years, multiple guards reported that the stain would sometimes appear wet, glistening, as if the blood was fresh. Officer Ernest Lagason documented this on June 2, 1949. The stain near cell 12 appeared damp at 7:30 a.m. during morning count. I touched it. My hand came away dry. The visual appearance of moisture persisted for approximately 20 minutes, then faded. This happened repeatedly. Different shifts, different witnesses. The stain would appear wet, then dry, with no moisture present when touched. Chemical analysis showed only residue of cleaning agents. No blood remained. Yet the visual phenomenon continued. And then there were the cold spots. Cells 12, 13, and 14 in D block maintained temperatures significantly lower than surrounding areas. This was documented consistently from 1937 through the prison's closure in 1963. Engineering reports show that contractors examined the ventilation system 6 times. They found no structural explanation. The cells shared the same air circulation as adjacent cells, same insulation, same exposure. Yet they remained 15 to 20 degrees colder. Prisoners complained constantly. They would request transfers from those cells, claiming they could not sleep, that the cold was unnatural, that something else was in the cell with them. Officer Philip Bergen worked D Block from 1950 to 1958. In a 1982 interview conducted by a local historian, he described the assignment. "Those 3 cells were wrong. I do not have another word for it. Wrong. The temperature was part of it. But there was also a feeling, a weight, like being watched by something that was deciding whether to act. I would walk past those cells, and every instinct told me to walk faster, to get away. I am not a superstitious man, but I learned to trust that instinct." The pattern was complete. Multiple phenomena, multiple witnesses, decades of documentation, all centered on specific locations within the prison. Cellblock D, the hole, Cell B 206. These were not random hauntings. They were geographically precise, historically consistent, and they occurred whether prisoners were present or not. Alcatraz was creating something, an accumulation, a residue of suffering that did not dissipate with time. In 1956, that residue would produce the most documented and terrifying incident in the prison's history. The incident began on July 10, 1956. A prisoner named Walter Dolison was placed in solitary cell 14 for attacking a guard during lunch. Dolison was 28 years old, serving a 20-year sentence for armed robbery. He had no history of mental illness, no prior disciplinary issues beyond the assault that landed him in the hole. The standard procedure was straightforward. Strip the prisoner, medical examination, isolation for 19 days maximum. But Dolison lasted less than 72 hours. Officer Arnold Baker was assigned to D Block that week. His shift log provides a minute-by-minute account of what occurred. On July 10th at 3 p.m., Dolison was locked in cell 14. Baker's log notes: prisoner calm, no resistance, cell secured at 1500 hours. At 8 p.m., Baker conducted his evening round. Dolison was sitting on the bunk. Quiet. Baker noted nothing unusual. At 11 p.m., Baker was at his desk when he heard Dolison's voice, not shouting, speaking at normal volume. Baker walked to cell 14 and listened. Dolison appeared to be having a conversation. Baker could only hear one side. "I did not do that. You are mistaken." Pause. "I told you. That was not me." Pause. "Leave me alone." Baker opened the food slot and shined his flashlight inside. Dolison was standing in the center of the cell, facing the corner. Baker asked who he was talking to. Dolison turned slowly and looked directly at Baker. "The man in the corner. He says I killed him, but I have never killed anyone." Baker shined his light into the corner. "Empty." He ordered Dolison to return to his bunk and stop talking. Dolison complied. Baker closed the slot and returned to his desk. At 2:30 a.m. on July 11th, Dolison began screaming. Baker ran to the cell. The screaming was constant, high-pitched, the sound of someone in absolute terror. Baker opened the slot. Dolison was pressed against the door, pounding with both fists. His voice was raw. He was shouting, "Get it away from me! Get it away! It is touching me! It is cold! Get it away!" Baker called for backup. 2 additional officers arrived. They opened the cell door. Dolison collapsed into the corridor, gasping. His skin was pale, clammy. He was shaking violently. The officers carried him to the medical unit. Dr. Levinson examined him at 3 a.m. Dolison's core body temperature was 94.6 degrees Fahrenheit, mild hypothermia, in a cell that should have been 65 degrees at minimum. Dr. Levinson's report states, "The prisoner exhibits symptoms consistent with extreme cold exposure. However, the environmental conditions in solitary confinement do not support this diagnosis. I have no medical explanation for his presentation." Dolison was coherent enough to provide a statement. He described a figure that appeared in the corner of the cell at approximately 2 a.m. Dark, human-shaped. It moved toward him slowly. When it touched him, his entire body went cold. He said he could feel it pulling something out of him: heat, breath, life. Dr. Levinson prescribed sedatives and recommended Dolison be transferred to a standard cell. But Warden Paul Madigan refused. Dolison had assaulted a guard. The punishment would be completed. He was returned to cell 14 the next morning. Dolison lasted 6 hours. At 8 p.m. on July 11th, Officer Baker heard Dolison laughing, not hysteria, calm, genuine laughter. Baker approached the cell and listened. Dolison was speaking again. "Yes, I see now. You are right. I understand." Baker opened the slot. Dolison was sitting cross-legged in the center of the cell, smiling. He looked at Baker and said, "He explained it to me. We do not leave. None of us leave. The cells remember. He has been here since 39. He says there are others. They are all still here." Baker asked who he was talking to. Dolison's smile faded. "The man with orange eyes, the one who has been waiting." Baker immediately called Dr. Levinson. Dolison was removed from the cell at 9 p.m. and placed under psychiatric observation. He was diagnosed with acute psychotic episode induced by isolation. But the psychiatrist's notes include a troubling detail. When asked why he believed the entity had orange eyes, Dolison responded, "Because that is what Officer McCain told him before he died." Rufus McCain had died in 1939, 17 years earlier. Walter Dolison was not incarcerated at Alcatraz in 1939. He was 11 years old. There is no record of him having access to prison archives or historical files. He could not have known about McCain. He could not have known about the orange eyes, unless something in cell 14 told him. Dolison was never returned to solitary confinement. He completed his sentence in the general population and was released in 1960. In a 1973 interview with a parole officer, he was asked about his time in the hole. He said, "I felt it. It was real, and it is still there. That place does not forget." But the most disturbing incident was yet to come. In October of 1958, Cellblock D experienced a mass phenomenon that remains unexplained to this day. For 3 consecutive nights, guards documented identical sounds occurring at the same time from cells that were confirmed empty. October 14th, Officer Raymond Knoll was working the night shift. At 11:50 p.m., he heard screaming from the direction of the hole. Multiple voices, men screaming in unison. The sound lasted approximately 90 seconds, then stopped abruptly. Knoll immediately checked all cells in D block. Every cell was empty. The block was not in use that week due to maintenance work. Knoll filed an incident report. His supervisor, Lieutenant Philip Swigert, noted the report but took no action. October 15th, Officer George DeVincenzi was assigned to D block. At 11:50 p.m., he heard the screaming. He described it as at least 6 different voices, all male, all screaming in terror. The sound came from the solitary cells at the end of the tier. DeVincenzi ran to the location. Silence. He checked every cell. Empty. He filed a report identical to Knoll's. October 16th. This time, Lieutenant Swigert personally took the night shift in D Block. He positioned himself at the desk with a clear view of the entire tier. At 11:49 p.m., he prepared for the phenomenon. At 11:50 p.m., it began. Swigert's official report is preserved in the National Archives. At 23:50 hours, I heard multiple male voices screaming from the direction of cells 12 through 14. The sound was clear and distinct. I estimate 5 to 7 separate voices. I immediately walked to the location and visually confirmed all cells were empty and secured. The screaming continued for approximately 100 seconds, then ceased simultaneously. I conducted a full search of the tier and found no prisoners, no mechanical equipment, and no explanation for the sounds. I am unable to provide a rational cause. 3 consecutive nights, 3 different officers, one of them a senior supervisor, all documenting the same phenomenon. Federal records confirm that no prisoners were housed in Cellblock D during that week. The cell block was physically empty, and yet the screams continued. The same time, the same cells, the same sound of men in absolute terror. Something had learned to repeat itself, to replay its own death, again and again. Warden Madigan ordered Cellblock D closed indefinitely. The official reason was structural maintenance, but officers knew better. The word spread quietly through the ranks. Do not enter D Block alone. Do not work the night shift there. Do not listen to the sounds. Because the sounds were not random. They were not hallucinations. They were memory. The building's memory. And it was replaying the suffering it had witnessed for 24 years. In 1963, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary was officially closed. Too expensive to maintain, too isolated, too outdated for modern corrections philosophy. The last prisoners were transferred on March 21st. The staff was reassigned. The cells were emptied. But as Rangers would soon discover, emptying the cells did not mean they were unoccupied. The island did not remain empty for long. In 1973, Alcatraz became part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. Park rangers were assigned to maintain the buildings and conduct tours. They were told the island's history, the escapes, the riots, the famous inmates. But they were not told about Cellblock D, about the screams, about the cold, about what waited in the darkness. They would learn soon enough. Ranger John Cantwell was assigned to Alcatraz in October of 1973. His first night shift was October 28th. He was given keys to the main cell house and told to conduct security rounds every 2 hours. At 11 p.m., he entered Cellblock D for the first time. The temperature dropped immediately. Cantwell's breath condensed in the air. He checked his thermometer. 54 degrees. The rest of the cell house was 68. He walked down the tier toward the solitary cells. The cold intensified. At cell 14, his thermometer read 49 degrees. Cantwell heard footsteps behind him. He turned. The corridor was empty. He continued walking. The footsteps followed. He stopped. They stopped. He started running. They ran. Cantwell exited Cellblock D and did not return for the rest of his shift. The next morning, he reported the incident to his supervisor. He was told that temperature fluctuations were normal in old buildings, that acoustic tricks could explain the footsteps, that he would adjust. He did not adjust. Cantwell requested reassignment after 6 weeks. In a 1988 interview, he stated, "I have worked in wilderness areas. I have dealt with dangerous wildlife. I have never been afraid of my job, but that place is occupied. I do not care what the official position is. Something is in those cells, and it does not want company." Cantwell was not alone. Between 1973 and 1985, 9 different rangers requested transfer from Alcatraz specifically citing experiences in Cellblock D. Their reports are remarkably consistent. Cold spots, footsteps, voices, shadow figures seen in peripheral vision, the sound of cell doors slamming when all doors were secured open. The National Park Service maintains detailed incident logs. These are not public documents, but portions were released through Freedom of Information requests in the 1990s. Between 1973 and 2010, over 100 separate incidents were documented by park staff. Unexplained sounds, temperature anomalies, equipment failures localized to Cellblock D. In 1982, the Park Service installed an electronic monitoring system in the main cell house, motion sensors, temperature gauges, automated alerts for unauthorized entry. Within 3 months, the system began triggering false alarms exclusively in Cellblock D. Technician Robert Harris was called to inspect the sensors on April 7, 1982. He found the motion detectors in perfect working order. Yet they continued to activate between 11 p.m. and midnight with no visible cause. Harris installed additional sensors. They malfunctioned within a week. He replaced the entire system. Same result. In his final report, Harris noted, "The equipment is functioning correctly. The alerts are genuine. Something is triggering the motion sensors. I cannot determine what." The Park Service eventually disabled the sensors in Cellblock D. The official reason was cost efficiency. But rangers understood. The building was not compatible with modern technology. Or perhaps modern technology was not compatible with what the building contained. Tourists began reporting experiences as well. Alcatraz receives over 1 million visitors annually. Most come for the history, the architecture, the stories of gangsters and escape attempts. They do not come expecting supernatural phenomena, which makes their reports more credible. Between 1980 and 2020, visitor incident reports filed with park rangers describe recurring experiences, sudden cold spots in specific locations. Cellblock D, the dining hall, the area near cell 14. Visitors report feeling watched, touched, pushed. Some report hearing whispers in languages they do not understand. In 1994, a tour group of 23 people was in Cellblock D at 2 p.m. 12 of them independently reported hearing sobbing from the end of the tier. They described it identically. A man crying, low and sustained, coming from the direction of the solitary cells. Rangers investigated. No source was found. The group members did not know each other. They had not discussed the island's haunting reputation, yet their descriptions matched perfectly. In 2003, a visitor named Sarah Chen took a photograph of cell 14. When she reviewed the image later, she noticed something. A dark shape in the corner of the cell, human-sized. It had not been visible to her eye when she took the photo. She submitted the image to park rangers. Photo analysis experts examined it. They could not definitively identify the shape, but they could not explain it as a shadow or camera artifact either. The shape appeared to have depth, dimension. It looked like someone was standing there. And the banjo still plays. Rangers working closing shift in the main cell house report hearing it. Not every night, but often enough that it has become an accepted phenomenon. Metallic notes echoing from the direction of cell B206. Always between 9 and 10 p.m. Always when the building is empty of visitors. In 2015, audio engineer Marcus Webb received permission to place recording equipment throughout the cell house for a 24-hour period. He was researching acoustic properties of historic structures. He had no knowledge of Alcatraz's paranormal reputation. Webb's equipment captured something at 9:42 p.m. near cell B206. 4 distinct notes, metallic, consistent with a banjo. The frequency analysis confirmed it was not mechanical noise, not wind, not settling of the building. It was a plucked string instrument. Webb reviewed every possible natural explanation. Temperature expansion, vibration from boat, traffic, electrical interference, nothing fit. In his final report, he wrote, "I have 40 years of experience in audio engineering. I have recorded in every environment imaginable. This sound has no natural source that I can identify. It is there, it is real. I do not know what produced it." Cellblock D remains the most avoided location among staff. Night security rounds are conducted in pairs. Rangers do not linger in the solitary cells. There is an unspoken understanding. The building tolerates presence, but it does not welcome it. In 2019, paranormal investigation team Spectre Analysis received rare permission to conduct an overnight investigation in Cellblock D. They brought electromagnetic field detectors, thermal cameras, and audio recording equipment. The team consisted of 5 investigators, all with backgrounds in electrical engineering and physics. They documented 73 separate anomalies over an 8-hour period. Temperature drops of 20 to 30 degrees in cells 12, 13, and 14. Electromagnetic spikes with no identified source. Audio recordings captured whispers, footsteps, and at 11:51 p.m., screaming. Lead investigator Dr. Patricia Moss reviewed the findings for 6 months before publishing her report. Her conclusion was cautious but definitive. We cannot identify conventional explanations for the phenomena documented in Cellblock D. The temperature variations defy thermodynamic principles for the space. The electromagnetic readings suggest organized energy patterns inconsistent with random environmental factors. The audio recordings capture sounds that have no mechanical or natural source. Our assessment is that Cellblock D exhibits measurable anomalous activity that warrants further study. But perhaps the most unsettling discovery was what the team did not find. Paranormal theory suggests that hauntings are typically tied to individual spirits. One person, one death, one unresolved trauma. But Cellblock D shows no evidence of a single entity. Instead, the phenomena suggest a cumulative imprint, multiple presences, multiple deaths, multiple instances of suffering that have merged into something collective. It is not one ghost. It is the memory of 1,576 men who were broken in those cells, 36 who died there, hundreds who descended into madness there. Their pain did not dissipate. It accumulated, year after year, layer upon layer, until the building itself became saturated. Alcatraz stands today as a museum, a monument to America's most infamous criminals and the prison designed to contain them. Over 1 million people walk through those cells every year. They take photographs. They listen to the audio tour. They imagine what it must have been like. Some of them do not have to imagine, because the cells remember. The corridors remember. The cold stone and rusted metal remember every scream, every sob, every moment of despair that occurred within those walls. And in certain places, at certain times, that memory becomes present. Cellblock D is locked now. Visitors are not permitted inside. The official reason is structural safety. But rangers know the truth. Some doors should remain closed. Some cells should remain empty. Because emptying them does not mean they are unoccupied. It never did. We build prisons to contain what we fear, to lock away those who threaten order and safety. We believe that when we close the door, the punishment ends with release or death, that walls are temporary, that suffering can be confined to a moment in time. Alcatraz proves otherwise. Extreme cruelty does not evaporate. Sustained suffering does not fade. When you design a place specifically to break the human spirit, when you strip away identity and hope and sanity over decades, something remains, an imprint, a stain, a memory that does not require a body to persist. The question is not whether Alcatraz is haunted. The evidence answers that. The question is what we created when we built a prison designed not to rehabilitate, but to erase. What happens when you concentrate that much pain in 22 acres of concrete and steel? When you lock men in darkness until their minds shatter? When you reduce human beings to numbers and silence and despair? The island remembers. It will always remember. And long after the last tourist has left, long after the buildings crumble into the bay, something will remain in the darkness of Cellblock D, waiting, watching, whispering to anyone who listens. Because some places do not forget. They cannot forget. They have become the thing they witnessed, and Alcatraz has witnessed too much.